Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
Hey everybody, this is David Perrodin, the Safety Doc, and I am here today with Larry Roberts of Readily Random, readilyrandom.com. Some of the best podcasts and interviews that you will ever find in the podcast sphere. So just cannot recommend Larry enough. I was fortunate to be a guest a long time ago on his show. But how I got on, I don't know. Larry brings in the absolute top guest. These stories are amazing. So somehow I snuck in there. So just want to welcome. Hey, Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. You said a whole lot of nice things about me there, and most of them are true. So yeah, I'll accept that with open arms.
So yeah, So Larry and I had talked a while about doing a co-show, and I'm really looking forward to our show today because we both tend to interview people who have very sensitive experiences to talk about. And in addition to that, when they're presenting those sensitive experiences, sometimes they present them in a manner which might seem a little aloof, like the demeanor is a little too easygoing for like what this person went through. And it's like, are they making light of what they went through? But no, it's like really, humor. When somebody's expressing humor, that's a way for them to sometimes tell a story, which is very devastating for them. But there's also another part that comes into this, and it's the fact that we have so many tragedies going on acutely and kind of consistently in the country and just in the world right now. That where does comedy fit into this? And when you release something, it's one of those things where it seems like it's always benchmarked to whatever the moment is in time. So even if like Larry and I were doing the show today, someone might listen to this show 4 weeks from now after some devastating, horrible, horrific thing has happened in the country, and then they're saying, "Well, David and Larry didn't seem like they were serious enough about these topics at hand." But the other part is, comedy is human, and comedy is mental medicine. But yet, how do you do comedy is part of shows, and how do you help guests with comedy, knowing that at any moment the narrative in the country could change? And I'll be the first one to admit, I did a show with Katie Pashon of Cajun Navy Relief, which was an excellent show. And she talked about all these great things the Cajun Navy was doing, such as donating boats and bringing supplies into Houston and Rockport, Texas after Hurricane Harvey. And I released the show, and about 12 hours later, news hit of the Las Vegas massacre. So I'm sitting there and I have all of these promotional kind of tweets and other things lined up of like, here's the good that's happening in America. And I'm like, I don't know if I can release these, because if I release these, are people going to think that I'm dismissing now the Las Vegas, event that happened? So I actually pulled back, and I never gave that show the promotion it deserved. And yet now I look back on that, and I'm going to have Larry, we're going to kind of work through both of our perspectives on this. But first of all, Larry, just like give us an update. Hey, what's going on with you? And before again, I didn't say this out of jest. Readilyrandom.com. I go every weekend. I download podcasts, and I download every interview that Larry has done. Because one, he's just skillful at his interview technique. And the second is the stories from the guests are so reflective, so insightful. There's just, it's the knowledge, and it's entertaining. But I feel like I am at the edge of my seat, and it's like almost a call to action. And Larry, I mean, I could go back and I could recite a number of the shows that I listened to, exactly what the character, not the character, but what your guest had said, and just how, it made me think and reflect. So I think honestly, I have a small kind of number of podcasts that I would listen to on a regular basis, like weekly. Yours is right there.
Well, I'm
So
very honored to hear that.
I appreciate that. So what's going on with you right now?
I got to tell you, the show is doing amazing things, especially with one of my recent guests, Miss Twyla Atwell. She has started an organization, and it's really picked up some steam. And I'm not tooting my own horn, but the podcast helped her gain some confidence. Whether it gained any overall support for her movement, she has grown leaps and bounds over the weeks since she's been on the show. And I'm so pleased to see that. Miss Atwell's got a very tragic and not necessarily tragic, but it's tragic in the sense that she did 3 years in prison. But she's coming through that. She was addicted to drugs. She's now clean. She's in a halfway house right now, and she's on her way back into mainstream society. She's paid her dues.
Right.
And the most awesome part of that story is that she's made a comeback like you wouldn't believe. And she's established a movement for right now. We're working on maybe going to try to turn that into a nonprofit, but we'll talk about that later.
All right.
But it's called FDAT.
Yeah.
And it's, EFDAT, and it stands for Everyone Fight Drug Addiction Today.
Okay.
And it's amazing to sit back and watch her grow just in the short amount of time. She was contacted today by a methadone clinic asking if they could support FDAT and start promoting
That's
FDAT.
awesome.
If she supports methadone. Certain addicts do and do not support methadone clinics, that sort of thing. Some say it's patchwork. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Just the fact that I'm seeing picture after picture after picture on Facebook with FDAT t-shirts, and now the methadone clinic has reached out asking if they could help. It's just gaining momentum at a tremendous rate, and I'm so excited for Ms. Twyla Atwell. Now,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I appreciate that interview, and if I remember correctly, what landed her in prison, you kind of questioned it, and I remember listening to it and questioning it. It didn't seem like it was going to land her in prison, but it was more like a accumulation of events of her life that kind of brought her to that judgment, which brought her to prison.
Well, yeah, I mean, the final straw was when she stole the cop car. That kind of sealed the deal.
But that happened in Tommy Boy, okay? So you can't tell me, or was it Black Sheep? All right, I think it was Black Sheep.
It was one of the two.
All right, and it was okay back then. All right.
Yeah, it wasn't okay then though, and she kicked out a window of the car and stole the car, and she's listening to the police scanner, and she's hearing them chase her on the. It's just,
did she do the bees? Bees everywhere.
Yeah.
Bees, stay away. I'm allergic. Stay away. Yeah. Just leave.
I don't
the
even
car,
know if
leave the
she's old
keys.
enough to know that movie. To be
All
honest
right.
with you,
This is where we got to help her out, Larry. We got.
I understand.
Right after this, we're going on Amazon, and we've got to set her up because. Yeah, if she hasn't seen, I think it's Black Sheep. Actually, if she hasn't seen it, she has to.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know. All I know is that she's in her mid to later 20s, so she probably does. I know
Yeah.
there's just some guys at work that are in their mid 20s, and I make references to Chris Farley movies quite often and other movies from that time frame, and they're like, "What?"
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm the same thing. I'm like, hey, Twisted Sister, whatever D. Snyder. They're like, who? What are you talking about? I'm like, we're not going to take it. And then like, but no. But yeah, I'm really happy for her. It was a powerful, an amazing, powerful story, and those are the stories that need to be told, because I think people get into situations where they feel either one, shamed to share their experience, or the other one that there is no way out. Like, I've done this and now like I'm badged forever and this is just what it is. And it's like, well, no, I mean, you can change the direction of your life. You're in control of that. So, that's what I really like. And especially, you had a guest, Sean Iams Fuller, which I mean, I admit, that's my go-to interview.
That one got you.
He does the impression of, I don't know who it was from The Walking Dead, but Larry, I think he does your impression too. Like, I am Larry Roberts from Readily Random, and are you ready to be larger than life? And I mean, he was just so spot on. I'm like, oh my goodness, like you were just rocking it. And actually follow me on Twitter, and then I'm like, oh my
That's
goodness,
good.
Sean Iams, follow me on Twitter. I'm like, wow. And then
Yeah, he's a good kid, man.
Yeah.
He really is. And, he's another one of those stories of recovery. He's another one of those that found himself at the bottom rung of life's ladder and has managed, just hand over hand and foot after foot to pull himself up out of that quicksand. And now he's doing his own thing, and he's doing it extremely well. He's got the awkward podcast.
Yeah.
Is that awkwardly?
Yes.
Man, now I feel bad. Sorry, Sean. I am Fuller. We'll find out, and we'll give you a proper plug.
This week, Sean's ratings just go down this week. So just suffers this massive. Yeah, he's got to kind of reevaluate. He's like, I don't know. My analytics are great. What happened?
Dang you, Larry. But no, and that's kind of the thing that I like to do with my show. I try to maintain, although we mentioned two guests and they both have very similar stories, I try overall to maintain a very diverse guest list.
Yeah.
Like for instance, yourself, you were episode 14 of the Readily Random podcast, and you were one of the original PhDs that I've had on the show. And, I'll intertwine educational experts and subject matter experts and in with individuals that are young, that are inexperienced, that are finding some of the pitfalls in life.
Right.
I'll bring in a homeschooling mom. That's a mom, a homeschool advocate.
Yeah, that was terrific. I love
Nikki's
that.
great. She fights for homeschooler rights in the state of Texas. I want to say throughout the nation, but she focuses on Texas since that's where we're at. This week, I just released yesterday, Dr. Nate Regier. I say Regier. He keeps correcting me. It's Regier, Regier, but he likes the French pronunciation that I introduced as well. So his whole take on life is conflict without casualties.
Yes.
And he owns Next Element Consulting, and they talk to police departments, college campuses, executive boards, corporate entities, you name it. He and his colleagues, they travel and they give these speeches on how to have effective conflict and to take the energy that conflict generates, and we all know that it generates a ton of it,
right,
and takes that energy and converts it into something positive, as opposed to, say, violence or begrudgment or anything else that would be considered, in a negative light. So that's a great one too.
Yeah, I look forward to that. And just to round out, was it Joe Navarro, right? Joe had...
Joe Navarro.
I think it was 3 minutes to midnight. So I'm listening to you interview him, and he's like, here's a point in time when we came 1 minute away from nuclear war, and here's how he interviewed. I'm like, oh my God, I never knew any of this. You're growing up and it's all, here's the moment, and, the guy pressed the wrong button, and here's how I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it's just... someone that's been there and shares this inside experience, once they've been far enough removed and once that time has kind of passed by. But I'm like, I had no idea, of these points we're flirting with life and death as a society.
Exactly. Does literally saving the entire Western world, does that time ever surpass? I mean, I'm going to the grave with that. I'm gonna get me a shirt or something.
Well, I know. Yeah,
I saved the world.
Yeah, Larry's like, I gotta, or Joe Navarro's like, Joe, I got a T-shirt that says I saved the world, and they gave me a pin and a clock, and I'm like, dude, whatever. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, I'm like, holy smokes. I'm I mowed my lawn.
Real life superhero.
I mowed my lawn, But yeah, I was I love that. And again, just how, and he's so nonchalant about it, when he comes on and presents. I mean, he's so modest, and that, again, I really appreciate that.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
So Larry, I'm glad the show's going well. I see your Twitter following has come out with a large club and has just stomped mine. Uh, I am sitting there. I'm sitting there every day, and then like one day it'll be up like 8, and the next day it's down 12, and it's like the stock market back in like 98. So I'm like, what's the hell's going on here? And like, and yeah, so it's kind of all over the place, but eventually, it's creeping in the right direction, but it's kind of funny because I'm like, and of course, you got to be careful on just watching like who's following you. Hey, I can sell you this, whatever, and you can have 30,000 Skype followers or not Skype, but Twitter followers and stuff like that. But then I think I am getting now like the genuine. I actually got an email, Larry. Get this. I got an email from a listener in Britain 2 days ago who listened to one of my shows and actually like detailed out kind of points of the show that this person liked and appreciated the honesty and points of reflection, stuff like that. And so I emailed this person back and I'm just like, really, thanks for doing this. Cause one, I don't know who all listens to the show, but to take the time and to put some thought into how the show impacted you was really meaningful for me because I really do this to try to reach people. And yeah, that was just a cool thing to get this out
That's
of the
amazing.
blue from Britain. So it was pretty cool. And for the Safety Doc, we are approaching our 50th episode in about 3 weeks. And
Nice.
it's cool. We've aimed, when I say we, it's me and many personalities that reside in my mind as I go through these things. But it's like me. It's me. I put these together, as probably you and you edit and you release and you promo and all of that. And I have had a lot of help from people, Larry, you're one of them, and people in the podcast community have helped in so many ways. But yeah, there was a podcaster who told me if you can get to 25 episodes, you're probably going to keep going. Like if you can get to 25, like you're going to, and I enjoy it. And I did have a couple of weeks for the first time. I think I did like 40 straight. And then I took like a week off because I had some real intense work deadlines to be under. And then I had like pneumonia. So I recorded a show, and it sounded like, whoever's listening to it should just dial 911 and send them to my house because they're like, I'm just like on my deathbed recording this thing. And I'm like, so that show I didn't even put up, but yeah, I tried to do a show a week and I brought in some different guests. And one of the most popular shows I ever did, I interviewed a guy who's in his 60s and he's blind and he's worked for 40 years. And the guy's like just was so comedic, but he's telling these stories of like he worked in a prison and they would have fire drills and he would take his guide dog and he'd have to kind of bench press his guide dog up a ladder through a window. Now, granted, you get out the window and there's a fire escape there. It's not like you drop the dog 2 stories and then you jump down, but he's telling this story along with all these other incredible stories just from his life, that are safety related. And that show was extremely popular, and a number of people had emailed me and asked for his contact information too. And he was a fun guy to interview. And I think that was, for me, and that was probably early on, that was really a experience where I was like, okay, this is helping people. And there was a lady who emailed me, Larry, and she herself was blind and had a guide dog, and she was just starting a blog, and she was saying, this is really an inspiration to me. I mean, she's probably like in her mid-20s, and she said, this really meant a lot to me, and here's why. So I try to cover some different areas of safety. It's funny because people who talk about my show, this is how it always happens, Larry. They'll say, it's not as boring as what you would think it would be. Like, that's the preface. And it happened again. Like, I'm listening to a podcast and they're kind of giving me a shout out. And it's a really, it's properly placed, but it's in a really awkward manner. So it's like they preface it by saying, like, yeah, like safety's not that exciting, but yeah, David's going to cover a lot of guests and a lot of things all in the range of safety. And it's not like ladder clearances but if you're worried about your kid trick-or-treating and going up to someone's door and they're in blue underwear and a Superman or a Captain America t-shirt, like, that's not a place for them to go. So I'm like, I never said that. I'm like, where the hell are you getting this from? I'm like, I never had that in a show, like ever. I kind of like get where you're coming from of saying I give helpful advice, but at least, don't like start freelancing in your support of me, because, not that that's not good advice, but I don't have a show on that. But anyway, yeah, so it's been good. And I think, I found your show and I think the shows complement each other. I would say yours, you get in, you bring those deep stories out of people. I might look for specific research articles or something like that, or get people
Sure.
to talk about a certain area of expertise. Like I interviewed a drone operator, um, right before Hurricane Harvey hit. And I mean, it was before the hurricane was even like a tropical depression or anything like that. And it's a couple of weeks before. And this guy, commercial drone operator, we did a field interview. So we did part in the studio with I have to upgrade my equipment. The audio kind of was poor on it, but we went out in the field and he was showing how he could like fly this drone out at 70 miles an hour to do like a search and rescue. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know if did I share with you the story of Fox News and Hurricane Harvey getting a hold of me? Fox News out of New York.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that they did call, and I think we were actually trying to do something with your website at the time to get it up to speed in time for the Fox interview. And then lo and behold,
Yeah,
I'll let you finish.
Yeah,
I don't want to steal your thunder there.
Yeah. So before Larry and I really, we get into it, and so anyway, I get this call in the morning as Hurricane Harvey is making landfall, and it's Fox News out of New York, like the regular Fox and Friends out of New York, and this is what it is. It's like we're sending a car to pick you up, and we're going to take you to a studio in Madison, Wisconsin, and then we are going to cut you in to this live show before, like, I don't know, 22 million people or whatever it was. And you are going to talk about how drones will be a part of the reconnaissance of after the hurricane, which I'm minimally qualified to talk about anything of that level outside of doing this interview with this guy. But I'm like, yeah, sure. No problem. I mean, because generally though, I know surveillance and how this works in the safety and stuff like that. So like, I'm excited. Like I'm going to my closet, I'm picking out the shirt and the sport coat. 10 minutes later, they get a hold of me and they're like, hey, we got great news. We found a guy like in Dallas who we're going to interview instead. So you don't have to do, your day's free.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, yeah, like, what do you think would be some good questions? And I'm like, well, in Joplin, Missouri, they took a long time, like 15 hours to do like a surveillance after the 2011 tornadoes. And now you can just really probably do that in about, an hour and a half if you had a series of drones. And they're like, yeah, it's all good stuff. So great. And then I interrupt them. I'm like, I could just like do this for you. Like, I could, seriously, it's not a big problem. Like I'll drive down myself. Like you're going to, no, we're fine. We're fine. Thanks a lot. So I watched this, and the guy that they interviewed, now nothing against him, but all they really wanted was the backdrop. It was kind of, and I think Dallas was it got maybe a little bit of rain or mist. I mean, that was it.
Yeah, we got a little bit of something, nothing crazy.
Okay, so this guy like shows his drone and he's kind of talking, but he doesn't know like the science behind it or like the science behind rescue and evacuation and reconnaissance, which I do. I mean, because I have a PhD in this stuff. So I felt like, I'm like, oh, nice guy, but I mean, you could have just brought anybody in to do that. So yeah, I was like all jazzed, and then yeah, Fox and Friends, hey, your day just opened up.
The audacity to tell it like that, Once you go, we got somebody else, but to say your day just opened up, it's just like, should I thank you? Or
yeah, they were kind of excited, and it's in the meantime, they sent me like this email which gives directions on kind of like what you should do and what you shouldn't do and all these other things. And I don't know, it was just funny because I came a sliver away from at least being able to cite that. So I don't know how you reference on a resume that you were called by Fox News and for 10 minutes you were the guy. You were the guy until they found another guy, but you're the guy. So,
Well, the one good thing you can take from that though is your name is out there. People do recognize your name. And if you got the first call, how did they get a hold of you the first time? How many others have you on their list of experts to call? Now, I don't know if it's happened since then either. I'm just trying to be positive here. But at least you have that little feather in your cap, you know?
Yeah, I did take the same away from it. And I do some national consulting with Sprigio, which is the nation's leader in school bullying. So I have a standing agreement with them where every month we do work together on their interface system so kids can report bullying. So they, that's great. And when it comes to, I do some expert witness stuff in the country, and really I get called for some, very complicated cases, which typically involve like death and things like that. So, yeah, my name is out there, I guess. But the real highlight, though, once I made Readily Random, I would just bring that back to people. Fox and Friends. I was like, I've been on Readily Random.
Oh, is that? Oh, well, shoot, come on out.
Guys,
we got a limo waiting on you.
Yeah. They're like, why the hell didn't you bring this up right away? Don't you know that's how you start these conversations?
That is the show to be on.
Yeah. Fox and Friends. But so Larry, so tell me about so I listened to when you interview people, and yes. I'm just going to talk about Sean Imes, okay? Because I'm his biggest fan. Damn it, I am.
I know. I should have re-listened to that episode. Oh, by the way, I went back and I pulled up my show notes there, and it's a Horribly Awkward podcast. Okay. Is Mr. Fuller's show.
All right. Yeah, he's going to unfollow me. I know it. It took like 2 months. I kind of had to email him and things like that. And, hey, love your show. By the way, I'm on Twitter. Sean, But honestly, I'm happy. I'm happy for him. I love his work. But okay, so Sean comes on, and maybe before we get into this,
sure.
And it's probably not too much different than Twyla. And again, this isn't the narrative, of course, for all of your guests. We talked about Joe Navarro and things like that, but maybe you can just give us a brief synopsis of maybe how you brought Sean on your show, and maybe Sean's background and what the show was about.
The show was quite random, actually, and here I have to, and Sean even knows this, so I'm not breaking news here. I thought Sean was somebody else.
Really?
There's
this just
another...
gets better for Sean.
The thing is, though, like I say, this isn't breaking news. I told him this. I'm like, oh, you're not him. Oh, well, hey, how you doing?
Right. You didn't play Ulu on Star Trek? That's not you? Oh, damn it.
But no, man. I knew who he was, too, because he had actually, the gentleman that I thought he had been on their show probably more than once. Right. And it's all part of, I used to be a part of a network, a podcast network that they're great. It's just they weren't for me any longer.
Yeah.
So we parted amicably.
Yeah.
But it's just because Readily Random doesn't fit their format anymore. I had a show before that we won't even discuss because it doesn't exist anymore, so it doesn't matter. But it was a different format. It was pure comedy, and It was rock. It was awesome. Not really. It's dead, so it wasn't all that great. But I had known these guys from that network, and I'll even say it, the BS Podcast Network. They gathered together several shows, and they help promote your show. They're a great group of guys. And anyways, again, that's how I came across him, was from the BS Podcast Network. And I just reached out on Twitter. Hey, man, would you mind coming on the show? I think you got a great story to tell. This would be fun. We have similar interests. Let's make it happen. And lo and behold, he did. So from that point on, we had some things in common. You mentioned the Walking Dead character that he does. That's actually, he does the voice of Dave Fennoy. And Dave Fennoy, he voices one of the main characters in the Walking Dead video game.
Yeah.
And Dave Fennoy just happens to be one of my voiceover coaches.
Wow.
So I know Dave, and he's like, oh my God, Dave, that's crazy. That's so awesome. And that's when he told me he did the impression, which he does nail, by the way.
Yeah.
It just went from there. And one of the things when I go into a show, I do very little preparation other than knowing who I'm talking to and a high level understanding of why I'm talking to them. Now, there's some guests, like I'm trying to land another guest for next week, and she's a breast cancer survivor and now a breast cancer advocate.
Okay.
So, of course, I'm doing my research on some breast cancer statistics and that sort of thing. So I don't walk completely blind into that particular discussion.
Yeah.
But overall, I just like to have conversations. I really try to avoid a static interview. And there were some guests back in the early stages of Readily Random where I actually did have a questionnaire. And I asked everybody the same questions. And then I would wind in some other questions as well when the opportunity presented itself. And I had got this questionnaire from another very popular podcast. I mean, this guy, he makes $500,000 a year doing podcasts only. And of course, he tells you how to podcast and how you can be rich too podcasting if you just follow my 10 steps.
Right.
And so I thought, all right, I'm going to get some consistency here. I'm going to try this approach. And I hated it.
Okay.
Because that's not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not me to ask the same static questions and try to elicit multiple unique responses. Because if the individual, I think the reason it works for the gentleman that I got the questionnaire from is because his guests know what they're getting into. I mean, he's done literally his show is in the multiples of thousands of episodes. He does a show a day.
Oh
by
my
the way.
goodness! Wow.
Yeah. So his guests know who he is.
Yeah.
And they know what to expect.
Yeah.
And some of my guests don't even know what a podcast is. They go, "What? What is that?"
Right.
Oh,
right.
It's an interview. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be great. And then, even then, when they come on, they go, "What station is this going to be on?" Well, it's the internet. So
they're 405 Media out of Los Angeles.
Well, it's there too. Yes, it is. Thanks to you, my show's on there too, by the way. But I got away from that after a few episodes because, like I say, it just got so redundant.
Yeah.
And I just knew I wasn't going to be able to keep this up for an extended period of time. So I went back to who I really am, and that's just the guy that likes to talk a lot and likes to learn a lot as well. And from that point forward, I decided to take Readily Random and just make it a forum for individuals to share their stories. And it's so much more fun that way. And people, once I start the conversation and they don't feel like they're getting grilled with questions,
right,
and they don't feel like they're being put on the spot to have this answer or that answer or why'd you do it like this or
right,
anything along those lines,
they
start to open up. You can feel their guard start to come down. And I'll use Dr. Nate's episode that it's out there right now. I didn't really know what to expect from Dr. Regier. There we go, Regier. I can't say it even if I try. I didn't know what to expect from him. And I'm thinking, okay, this guy's a PhD, so he's going to be very precise and very sharp with everything he says, because one of the last PhDs I talked to was it was by far my most difficult episode of this podcast, and it was just so awkward. I eventually had to say, and I didn't leave this in the episode, I was just like, I don't really know what to say because you kind of intimidate me.
Really?
and I was, because I would crack a joke and it was just, not even a nothing, just dead silence. And then when he would come back, he would still be so deadpan.
So Larry, do you think that's because he feels he needed to stay the narrative? Like, in my professional community, people could listen to this and I just have to make sure I stick to the narrative of doing this professional, or was it someone who really was just so like, I am just the science person. This is the response that I'm going to give to you. They're not trying to be adversarial, but this is just what they are.
Right. And I feel that way 100%.
Okay.
He wasn't being confrontational. He wasn't trying to stir up conflict. He wasn't trying to be a bad guest on the show. He just, I believe that's him.
Yeah.
He's happiest in his studio and his lab doing his particular craft. And that's where he obviously excels. He's one of the number one practitioners of his craft on the planet. So that's who he is. And it's not a bad thing. It's just for me, it was difficult to adjust to.
Right. Right.
And it kind of caught me off guard because usually, I can get somebody to relax a little bit after the first 5-10 minutes max. And here I am 30 plus minutes into the episode and I'm still going, God, how am I going to get through this guy's force field, So, all right, well, it's been great talking to you. Got to go. Bye. But anyways, that's and I even forget what the narrative of this, what am I answering? I'm just
Larry's like, where the hell was the question here?
Yeah.
We put these together. Is it, no, you're kind of expanding on, you brought Sean Iams on and you're talking about, your guests and how your guests, open up and share things and so one of the things that I want to put, I'm not putting you on the spot, obviously, but, I'm just asking is, so I'm listening to Sean and I'm loving Sean's interview and I'm a consumer of podcasts and I understand people's stories. I mean, I'm a critical incident debriefer for a county, so I'll work with people. I might get a call and then they could say there's been an accident on the interstate that runs past our community, show up at the fire station and we're going to do a debriefing that, you're going to be a part of helping people debrief 3 bodies that were taken off the highway, and wow. That just happens. But I mean, I've been specially trained for that outside of the PhD stuff, but now I don't know where the hell is going, Larry. Now we got to bring in a third we got to bring Sean Iams into this because that guy's going to watch every word that we say. But
thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
With Sean though was, he's telling his story and he's, he's kind of laughing and he's upbeat and he's reflective as he's going through this. He's talking even to, about like, hey, when I worked together, like he was out in California and everyone was kind of doing speed. That's just what we had to do. And I had like a nice bike and I had to sell it for like a junky bike. And I had this and anything was just blowing for drugs and all this. And so I'm listening to this and I totally get where he's coming from on this. But at the same time, I'm thinking there could be someone listening to this who's just thinking, this guy's not taking this as serious as he should be. Like, not you, but I'm saying like Sean isn't telling his story as seriously as he should be. I didn't get that impression, but I mean, I believe some people like the person you talked about, for example, a PhD. I think there are some people out there who expect a narrative like this to be shared in a very scripted specific format. And I mean, for example, like Larry, where I used to work, like, there was no humor in the workplace whatsoever. I mean, it was just not there no matter what. And I think when you tell a story like this, people use humor. Like I've had people who have, attended, car crashes and things like that, who will do a little bit of a laugh as they're telling something. And it kind of goes back to like the TV show MASH and things like that, where it's just a mechanism for people feel safe then in saying something. It's just a vehicle for them to communicate those words. And it's kind of weird because there's a podcaster out there, Stefan Molyneux, and sometimes he'll interview people and he kind of gets on them. Like if they're telling a really hard story and he said, well, it's really hard for me to take your story seriously when you're laughing. I'm like, the person's only doing that as a self-defense thing. This is they're just shaking as they're telling you this, but, I guess, how do you, are there any points like when you're listening to people, when you're thinking, I'm not sure my audience is going to receive this correctly, or do you do any post edit? I mean, not that you're manipulating what people say, or do you work ahead of time with people? Or I guess I've run into this on some of my interviews, and I'd like to get your take. And I think in general, everybody has to kind of deal with this on some aspect of, when somebody comes on and the way that they're telling the narrative doesn't quite maybe fit the narrative.
Yeah, it's whenever you hear you've taken Sean as an example, Twyla as an example. I have other guests that have been on that are very similar in their storytelling. Uh, it's hard for me to step back and go, hey, I don't appreciate the way you're presenting this, as long as they operate within the parameters of my show. And those parameters are fairly wide open, with the exception of the fact of keep it clean.
Right.
This is a wholesome family show.
Right.
I want soccer moms to be able to get I can't even talk. I'm so emotional. I want soccer moms to get
Right.
as much enjoyment out of this with the kids in the car as someone else may have at the gym as they're working out. But I want it to be a diverse listening audience, and that's another reason I provide such a diverse set of guests.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the only time I ever go over anything is I say that basically what I just said. I don't go into the whole soccer mom thing, but I just go, look, it's a clean show. Please keep it clean. I don't like to edit, and I sure don't like to put beeps in.
Right.
I had one guest that I told him beforehand, and he still dropped an F-bomb or two, and I had to bleep him, but he's a gym owner. He trains mixed martial artists.
Yeah.
He's trained the world champions. So F to him is just another word in his vocabulary.
Right.
So he's like, oh yeah, I'll keep it clean for you there. And of course it just boom. You got into the moment. But other than that, I don't like to know too much about the guests. Because if they tell me too much before the show, it's very difficult for me to react naturally during the show. Go ahead.
Oh, I had an instance where I had a tremendous guest, and at one point in the interview, the guest was had mentioned her ex-husband and was just saying, as a matter of protocol of we were recalling some things that she had done kind of previously in the past. It was more informational, and she said, well, when I was with my ex-husband, this was the way we approached things. And then all of a sudden I could sense like she felt she stepped over into a boundary she didn't want to talk about. And so she was trying to back herself out of that. And it became like really cumbersome for her to, it's like she didn't ever even want to mention him in the show, but not like disrespectful, but didn't find a way out. So it was one of those things we got done. And I said, it seemed like that wasn't where you want it to go. And what I can do is I can just edit that section out. It doesn't impact your message at all. And she's like, I would appreciate that, because I wasn't thinking I was going to go there. It was just a flash memory. And then I had somebody else kind of go off who was doing a great interview and kind of went and started to attack like another another organization in the field. And it really started to get pretty intense. And I went back and visited with that person and said, you know what, when you do this, like, I know you were passionate in the moment, but like, if we put this out there, I think it takes away from what you're trying to communicate about your own organization. So my advice is that I'm going to take this section just completely out. Like, I'm just going to take this out because I don't think it serves your message. And I understand, we talk and, it's live and it's in the moment, and then, go back and that guest understood it. I think the guest still kind of wanted it in there, but as my professional judgment, I was like, it wasn't really fair to the organization that was being the recipient, because they didn't have a chance at rebuttal. And this person did have one opportunity that I left in there just to say that they didn't to have a congruent view with this other organization. I thought, there you made your statement, but something too, I think there's an obligation to kind of protect people, because once they get going, I mean, you and I have kind of done this, and you've done it more than I have, but we can monitor and kind of know the direction, but sometimes people start to go down roads that they didn't think they were going to go down, just where their thought patterns take them. And I think there's an obligation to protect them a little bit without censoring, of just saying this is what the message of the show was, and then all of a sudden you kind of went off, like onto this, and I don't think this helps the message. I mean, that's at least my thought, and I've had to do that a few times, and I don't know. I mean, what's your thought on that?
I don't have as many episodes with this type of podcast as you do, so I haven't been exposed to quite as many interviews as you have. However, even on my previous show, there were still boundaries, in that show. And if someone took their comedy too far, or got overly offensive, or intentionally attacked a certain group or a certain anything, one stance or the other, I was known to cut that out. Because, like you say, it's not fair to the other party,
Right.
to not have an opportunity to defend themselves. And now, me personally, I do my best to keep my podcast as even keel as possible. I've only had one guest say, "Hey, what are the boundaries here? Can we talk about this political stance? And can we talk about, this religious affiliation? Can we do this?" And I caught myself when I was telling them before the show. I said, what did I say? I said, now, obviously I've had, mentions of Christianity on the show. And then I caught myself and I said, why is that obvious? There's just many other religious affiliations that are out there.
Right.
So I had to retract that. I said, well, okay, I don't want to say, obviously I've had Christian influences on the show, because what am I doing? I'm alienating all the other religions that are out there in our very diverse culture. So I that was the only time that I and it was me. It wasn't even my guest. I had to draw myself back, because that was an awfully arrogant thing for me to say.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, let me go back on kind of, following just our narrative here.
Sure.
So I guess, do you think there should be ever a preface? Now, again, Larry, I didn't feel it with like Sean or with Twyla, but do you think there should sometimes be a preface on a podcast like that, or even like a podcast of saying, sometimes people, I mean, that's almost probably bringing in like a psychologist or counselor or something, of saying sometimes people are going to tell these really painful narratives in a way that is almost going to, there's going to be a lot of laughter, there's going to be lightheartedness on their part, because they have to keep it at that surface level just in order to tell the story. I don't know. Here's the reason. I see like people being destroyed on Twitter, or people being destroyed. And actually I don't know if it's a friend as much as it's somebody I followed and was in communication with, who made a blog post that ended up, really kind of going viral. And this person took some big hits off of that. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is I don't know if everybody out, but maybe if you're not getting feedback, if someone's emailing you saying like, I think this person took this too lightly, or I think this, if there's young people listening to this, they're going to glamorize the message that's been told. I don't know. And maybe I'm off here, and maybe I'm feeling something that's not there, but I just know these stories of people who end up with a post that it gets misinterpreted, or a podcast that gets misinterpreted and excerpts taken out, and suddenly, they have this firestorm against them on Twitter. But at the same time, we we can't live that way as podcasters.
Right. And that's where where I was going to take my next response was, that's one of the cool things about being a podcaster is you can take your show, if you so choose, in any direction that you want. And individuals have obviously the choice to either listen or turn you off. There's no ratings per se to worry about, unless of course you've got ads that you're promoting as well. But even then, the statistics and the measurements there, your CPMs and whatnot, they're not so ridiculous that if you offend one or two people, that they're going to drop off dramatically. And that goes back to kind of what I was saying in that I don't like to know too much about the show, and I don't really like to put strict parameters around an episode.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, have I ever had like somebody that would be just grossly offensive on the show to one party or the other? No. And that comes down to my judgment. Do I even invite them on the show?
Right.
So
have you ever done a show and then, you're done recording it and all of a sudden something happens on a national or world scene that it's like, oh, like, I just did this show and now, or even, like Joe, and all of a sudden the next day it's North Korea is threatening to bomb the US. Does that change how you deliver that show? How you hashtag that show out? Do you have a different sensitivity to that? Or is it like, no, I don't know. Because I'll share with you, again, my experience.
Sure.
When the Vegas shooting came out, because it definitely changed the way I promoted a show, and I probably really valued a really terrific interview just because I got caught up in not wanting to put an image out there of, oh, look at all the good that's happening in the United States, of course, and then someone saying, what's this guy trying to do? Like 58 people were just killed, a day ago. But has that ever happened to you where all of a sudden you get done and this whole context where you record it has changed and now it impacts your show?
It definitely could have with the Navarro episode. Honestly, I think Joe Navarro is really the only guest that I've had that would be put into a position or the show, the topic would ever be really put into a position to where it's insensitive per se to release it. Now, if something tragic had happened and Joe for some reason didn't save the world again, and we were looking at mass casualties, I happen to be lucky enough to survive, I would have probably taken that into account and thought, well, this is not the time to be saying, hey, we saved the world when Chicago's been destroyed and New York's, heaven forbid any of that happens, but I'm saying hypothetically.
Right.
I would not have, I know I would have given it additional thought. Would I have still released it? Probably not. I probably wouldn't have released it at all. And I've only done that with one episode of Readily Random that I recorded, and I simply did not release it.
Okay.
And I hated doing that. I hated not releasing it, but there was just circumstances surrounding the episode that I felt disrespected. Let's just throw it out there. The individual that I was interviewing I could hear him playing video games the whole time. And this is an adult. I'm not talking a child. This is an adult. He had, I'd pick him in his mid-30s. And he's like, oh, yeah, uh-huh, ding, ding. Oh, yeah, that's right. Ding, ding. And I'm like, seriously?
Right.
So if you can't give me the respect of 30 to 45 minutes of your time, because that's all my shows run normally, then, I can't put you out there. I'm sorry. But that's the only time that I've ever been put in a position to even consider not releasing an actual episode. Hypothetically speaking, sure. Joe would have definitely been one that required some additional thought. But something like your situation, though, I probably would have put a preface on. This is just me. I'm not telling you how to do your show by any means. Please don't take it that way at all. But if I was to do anything with that episode, if I had interviewed someone that was from the Cajun Navy there that was helping tremendously and just really great message, I definitely see myself putting a disclaimer at the front of that particular episode. I just want to say that in light of the events in Las Vegas, our hearts go out to just whatever. I would pen something very, very appropriate, and then I would have just recorded that on the front end of that message and let everybody know that we know where our hearts are right now. But look, it's, everything's not bad. No matter what the media wants us to think, our entire country is not doing this like we saw in Vegas.
Right.
So I think I would have done something like that.
Yeah, that's good advice because, like I said, it was hard. Even like I'm thinking like, should I hashtag it out as like Vegas shooting? When I'm doing it on Twitter as one of the hashtags, because then, I'm hoping there are people who are going to read this who are probably, again, it's just, devastated by this. It feels like it's another slam against humanity. And maybe someone's going to read this and think, hey, it's like there was that song, I think, by Anne Murray in 1983. I sure could use a little good news today. And maybe that was something. And so yeah, I got to work through that. And I remember, Larry, and then I want to get on, kind of to our last segment here, which is going to be just kind of you and I before the advent of social media, back in our college days. I think like we're 1 year apart in age, and talking about some of just the humor back then. I mean, this was humor in that era. There wasn't the internet or social media or things like that, and just a different time of what humor it was. But yeah, it's really hard. I remember after the 9/11 attacks,
Sure,
there was a comedy show put on in New York. Now I'm fuzzy. I haven't researched this or anything, but I believe it was at that time, like, maybe 4 or 5 of the biggest comedians, Jerry Seinfeld and, whoever the others, but I believe they came together and they struggled with this and they admitted it. I don't know if they came on live before and just addressed the audience, for like 10 minutes and said, listen, we're comedians. This is what we do. We feel like, comedy is part of life. And we don't know how this is going to go. It's a bizarre feeling for us, but this, feels like we need to do this as a distraction and part of a healing process. Or they might have recorded that and just played it before, but somehow, like, as you said, there was a preface like before this, like, so they just didn't barrel out on stage and just get into routines. And that was really kind of the stepping on this kind of ice, of just like, how's this going to go? I mean, how are people going to receive it? And the fact was people were just like thirsty for it because they had been denied. And, even though it was, did it feel right or did it feel wrong? I mean, it was always part of what had been there in our society. And I think it was one of those healing measures. And there was, some time that had passed and they did preface it. So yeah, it's really interesting. And I think something that I would like to learn is to talk with, like a psychologist or someone like that. Or, if that's an interview that you have down the road. I mean, I don't have anyone lined up, but someone who talks about the interface of humor and comedy and tragedy. And it's not only that it's episodic anymore. Tragedy is that, what is it? 59% Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and the people don't have anything saved for retirement. And the people our age are taking care of their parents and taking care of their kids. And, all of these things. And, and now we're globally having to worry about being, a nuclear target at any time. Right. Because, you don't think it's going to happen, but doesn't mean it doesn't, it couldn't happen. Or I watched some documentary not too long ago, and it's like, there's so the documentary said there's really kind of 2 threats out there right now. And the 2 threats are, there's like 73 briefcases from the Soviet Union, nuclear briefcases, like just the size of a Samsonite briefcase, that could wipe out like a block and a half of a city. But they're like, imagine if it was New York or if it was in Washington, like what it would have, and then fallout and all this stuff. There are like 73 missing. And then they said the other part is with GPS systems, there are now, I guess, terrorist groups who are trying to imitate the GPS pings. The pings are very, very light. So like when drones pick up pings, or like your Garmin or something, the signals are extremely weak. And there was a scientist in Japan a couple months ago who uploaded to a available to anybody clearinghouse website ways to test like GPS systems. And after he did it, like, his colleagues were like, hey, like, you just kind of gave the blueprint of how to make a model to mirror a GPS system, which would give false information. And if that happened, like planes would crash and cars, and, so this guy's like, oh my God, I can't believe that. They took it down. Well, it doesn't matter. It's out there. But so the guy, they're kind of saying, well, really, like if there's going to be like huge mass things, these are probably like the two realistic things that are going to happen. So yeah, it's like, but at the same time, Larry, my mom tells stories of growing up during World War II, and they would do the air raid siren, and it was a small community, but Wisconsin. So, I mean, it was logical that there could be Soviet bombers coming in from over Canada. I mean, the narrative worked, but, they would have blackouts at night. So the fire alarm would go, the siren, and then everyone would have to shut off all their lights. And then they would have people in the civilian patrol, just from your community, who would walk up and down streets and make sure like all your window shades were pulled and stuff. I mean, this is my mom,
Wow.
She's still alive today. And then also the duck and cover drills, that they would do the sirens and you'd have to go underneath your desk, because of thinking that there's going to be an air raid, and just, I mean, there was a real authenticity. So every day you're living through that too, back in that time. But then, what did you have? I mean, you had Bob Hope, comedy, and I mean, it's different, but you had that because it was necessary. I mean, it was, so again, I mean, I think this is important, but we're in this age where people can take a something that's tweeted and take it out of context. And I don't know, it doesn't change I guess it does change what I do, and maybe it shouldn't. But the Vegas thing for the first time really was when I thought, I'm going to have a hard time promoting this show with Katie, because I just don't want this to come off as seeming like I'm trying to capitalize on Vegas to say, yeah, but look over here, look at all the great stuff happening down in, Texas right now with Cajun Navy. And I'm like, but I did the show beforehand. And so,
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
It's a tough scenario to find yourself in. I don't know that there is a right answer. You're talking about comedy and positive messages and something uplifting. And I honestly don't think that everybody needs that. Granted, there were hundreds of individuals that got injured, and 58, I believe, lost their lives. It's a horrible, horrible situation. I haven't seen anything as far as backlash for uplifting efforts or comedic efforts in regards to Las Vegas. I'm sorry. But I have seen there's a new series coming on Netflix, The Punisher, which is very violent. He's a superhero guy that just blows stuff up, and they're boycotting that in the wake of the Las Vegas violence. And to that, I can understand. Now here you are. Now you're going to promote violence when that level of violence and very similar violence just injured all these folks and took that many lives. But if they were and then they're releasing comedy shows all the time. You go to your must-see TV or whatever it may be. I don't even know. I don't watch that much TV. But whatever they're calling it these days, you've still got your 30-minute sitcoms, and they're still laughing, and they're still carrying on. They carried on the very next night. They probably carried on moments before it happened.
Right.
And it's not out of disrespect. And they don't pull the plug on uplifting shows to in the wake of such violence, right? So I think as long as you show a mutual respect for those that were caught up in it, I don't personally see how you can be looked at it in a negative light.
And I don't know if you watched the Jimmy Kimmel the night after, when he came on and about 15 minutes,
right,
with tears, was very passionate and put this as a gun narrative. And I don't want to go anywhere with this discussion of saying gun narrative or not gun narrative.
Right.
But, I study this stuff enough to know, and as more information has come out about Stephen Paddock, he was pretty well versed in explosives, and with the resources he had, if you would have taken, and I did this, like I did, I gathered some of the information and kind of mapped a little bit of this out. If you would have taken like a Timothy McVeigh type attack, if this guy would have chosen to do a fertilizer bomb in a van, and the way the access was for that facility, and I'm kind of doing like where the waves went out, because basically it would have just, instantly killed 1,500 people to 5,000, if not more, instantly.
Sure.
It would have basically liquefied the bodies. And so I'm looking at this thinking, okay, if that would have happened, because this guy had the capacity to do this, and we're taking mental, if mental illness was the case, it's really weird too, because people are like, well, mental illness screenings. Okay, I get that. But anybody who is wealthy, and if you're in Vegas and you're wearing sweatpants and sandals and you're have $1 million and you're going to a casino, someone's going to just be like, that guy's arrogant. He's arrogant. He's wealthy. He's arrogant. He's just, and that's what arrogant people that have money do. I mean, no one's going to raise these red flags. It's going to be like, that's what money that's his lifestyle. That's what he's doing. But I'm thinking, I'm trying to take this narrative. What's the narrative the next day on like Jimmy Kimmel, if instead of Stephen Paddock using these rifle, these assault weapons, what if it would have been a Timothy McVeigh type attack, and you would have had, let's say 5,000 people fatalities? I mean, absolutely horrible, but that's how it would have played out. The wave would have taken that many people out. There were not barriers and things like that, if not more.
Right.
And so then what does the discussion become? Because the ultimate item there is like, it's mental illness. It's a person that has this manifesto to inflict harm, who has this high level of intellect and these capabilities to use multiple means to deliver it, and did choose the guns, but could have easily chosen explosives because demonstrated an expertise in that area, or with the money he had could have obtained that. So I struggle with that, because I'm like, I don't know what the narrative then becomes if the means of delivery changes, even if the root cause, the root cause is static: mental illness, anger against society, whatever,
right.
But if this means of delivery changes, what does Jimmy Kimmel come on and talk about that night? I mean, what's the legislation? So I don't know. In a way, looking at it, through that perspective, I'm kind of like, I know where you're going with that. Like, and he's a comedian, obviously, and he said, it's hard to do comedy after these constant things. But I'm like, I don't know. The more and more, the information kind of comes out and things like that. I'm just like, what? I guess like I'd be curious just to understand from him what his narrative might have been had, again, this been like a McVeigh type bombing, which would have resulted in numerous more. And so I struggle with that, maybe from a researcher, maybe from a safety perspective of just saying, um, root causes of things seem to get lost or obscured, or I don't know. Does it make a sense, Larry? I mean, can you throw some
No,
light
it makes
on
a
that?
yeah. Well, I don't know that I can throw any light on it, but I can definitely see where you're coming from, and it's almost as calloused as this response may sound. It's not intended to be, but it almost sounds like the casualty count controls the narrative, and at the same time, you can say that although the root cause is the same, the method presents either an opportunity for a political stance or it doesn't. I mean, if you'd have had a Timothy McVeigh type situation, sure, you're going to have some gun or anti-gun rhetoric, but not nearly as much when the entire scenario played out with firearms. You don't hear a
Right.
lot of people going, "Hey, no cargo vans, and no explosives, no fertilizer, that sort of thing." So there's there's so many other parameters that come into play when laying out that type of an argument or that type of response.
Yeah. Yeah. So I struggle with that. And then just to build upon that, like our local media here in Madison, Wisconsin, the next day they're interviewing school officials and they're saying, well, what if that would have happened here? Like, what's your response? So they're transferring this event, which is, 22,000 people outdoors at night, in a 32, stories that this guy is up and he's firing and all this stuff. I'm like, you can't do that. Like
No, they're not even similar.
they're not even similar. And all you're doing is you're just trying to get ratings. And of course, people love to be on the TV and represent and of course say, well, we're prepared. We drill. And I'm thinking there's no way. Like if there was a football game at your football stadium, which seats 3,500 at night and someone's up from an elevated position, a tree stand, a block away, you know, you could have had probably something similar. I mean, it just is so infuriating to me when the media does this, and I have to remind myself. I mean, I know it's a click through, it's a grabs thing for eyes, and 3 days later they're on to something else. But and then interviewing and giving and bringing it to the backyard, because then like I've got kids 7-11 and they watch this stuff and then they're thinking, well, and they know, dad studies this stuff, but can this happen here? Well, in theory, I mean, it could happen everywhere, but this is a circumstance that was specifically to this location and the scenario. But yeah, I hate it when these narratives, because the context and situation is different. So, it's like, here was a car accident. Now, well, what if it happened here? Well, what was the composite of the road or the speed of the cars? What was the weather? I mean, what was this? What was the time? What was the daylight? What was the angle of the sun? How much fatigue did a driver have? I mean, all of these things, though, people they just transpose. There were three researchers, Larry, who did this article, and they're like some of the top disaster researchers in the world. And they did a research study, and they compared the Murrah City bombing in 2000 or in 1995 to the 2001 World Trade Center attacks. And they basically came up with all these comparisons and stuff like that. And I'm going through the study, and it got to the end and they gave recommendations, and it's like, the communication systems were not robust in either of these scenarios and whatever. And I'm going through this. I'm like, yeah, that's not really true though. Like you're pulling two contexts. One is in 1995, there were 16 million people that used the internet worldwide.
Right.
1995. In 2001, half the U.S. had the internet. Now, most of it was like text-based, but people were getting information. Actually, the media was really on top of covering the World Trade Center attacks. So they were getting information out like, pretty much every hour. And they even started the subways before Tower, what was it, 7 collapsed. So, I mean, you can't, and I mean, it's New York City. It's millions of people. You have one, all the arteries are shut off on the way in. Murrah is like pretty isolated to this one area. You can get north, south, east, west. I'm like, you can't compare these. Like they're two different completely, times. And and the biggest thing too is like information coming into disasters. But anyway, I could go on that, but it really, God, it
No,
irritates me to no end because, and I don't want to dismiss media people, but at some point, like professionally, when I work with schools or businesses, I have to say, I mean, these are just people who are, they're reading what's off a teleprompter. I mean, these are not investigative journalism, folks. These are people reading off a teleprompter, and I don't know.
No, and the whole thing that frustrates me the most about it is that most people don't put enough thought to draw those parallels. They just go, oh, well, if the news is there, by golly, then little Sally is in trouble here at the school in Wisconsin. They don't even consider anything beyond what the 5:30 news says, or they don't look at the various parameters that really played into the event. They look at the event as a whole. And maybe I know you look at it differently because that's your background. I like to think that I look at it differently because that's what interests me. And I'm a podcaster and I like to talk about these things and the extent of the cause and obviously the effect and what are some of the after effects and, what really played into that happening. All of those come into play for me personally, especially Vegas. I had friends in Vegas. I had friends at that concert, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And they posted a 60 some odd second video of them running and ducking for cover and Walter grabbing people and pulling them to the concrete and getting them out of the way. I mean, I know these people. I hung out with these people when they lived in Texas, and they're great people, but they're right there in the fray. So, I definitely had some inside information there. And now that some time's passed, I've considered trying to get them on the podcast. And, we've talked on my previous show, but just about silly stuff, trucks. That's what he and I have in common. We love trucks. We're from Texas. And
sure.
But I think it would be not great. It would be extremely insightful to hear someone that was actually there, and they're not manipulating facts. They filmed it. They have video on their phones, or their cameras, whichever it was. I'm sure it was their phone. It was Vanessa's phone, and there's no manipulating what happened. Now, of course, they're not up in the hotel. They don't know Mr. Paddock. They don't know all of the details that come into play and why it was planned and how it was planned and was there another shooter? Was there a someone really going through the crowd saying you're about to die, you're about to die?
Yeah.
What was all that happening? What did his girlfriend have to do with it? Why was she in the Philippines? Why was he wiring money? I mean, just all endless questions are there, but they do know the fear that they experienced on the street that night, and they do know the carnage that took place, and they do know the fear that they saw in everyone else around them, and that's an insight that not many, 20 some odd thousand people have.
Right.
But aside from that, that's a very small subsection of our country. So.
Wow. Well, Larry, you know what? Hey, let's,
now that we're all mad,
now that we're all mad, turn the media against us.
You'll never get another phone call from Fox, I'll tell you that.
Nope. Yeah, Sean's, calling around all these, agents and stuff like that. Hey, what can you do to prop up my clicks? I just took some big hits here from Larry and David. But no, I'm going to move us right now into a time. So, we're both in our, mid 40s, and I remember, college as being a time right before the internet. The internet at my college started my last semester, and my roommate had, he was in a paper science major. So, they make paper, and he had a friend in another college, and at night he would go over to the computer lab and he would email this friend, on the very basic first primitive email system.
Sure.
And I remember him telling me about this. And back then, not everybody had an email account. You had to like sign up for one. But I was like, what is this stuff? And I still had an Apple IIe, which had the floppy disk, and, there was no internet or anything like that. And you didn't have cell phones. But, I'm looking back at some of the college humor, and I got a couple of really, really great stories to share. And, I hope you do too, because I do want people to, like, okay, so like the person you had on who kind of stuck to the narrative of the PhD of being very much of the PhD with the shirt buttoned all the way to the top and all of that. Nothing against that, but just
Right.
and I guess I used to be that way, and I'm not that way anymore because I don't really have that organizational accountability, I guess, where someone's going to call me in and say, yeah, like, Dave, you can't. And I don't do anything that off the wall, but, I do have to kind of watch what I put out there, because all of this does get watched if I do expert witness work. I mean, they pull up everything that you do and everything you've ever written.
Sure.
But, at the same time, you're before a jury that's familiar with social media. So I think some of that actually works in your advantage. But unless Sean Iams is in the jury, because he's like, that Dave guy, here's my chance.
I got you now.
Stare me down. You're goner. Oh, but anyway, so how do you want? Can we just like volley? I'll do one, you do one. I'll do one, you do one.
We can sure try to volley. I may have a story. I have been desperately racking my brain.
What?
I'm telling you, my life is just the fact that I'm here is comedic. So just the fact that I'm still alive is comedic. But I'm dying to hear the volcano story.
Okay. Oh my.
So hit me with the volcano story, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So I attend college at UW Marathon Center, which is a 2-year college located, about 15 miles away from my house, my small town. So I can drive to college the first couple of years, which is great. And it's located in Wausau, Wisconsin. So Wausau has a ski hill. It's called Granite Peak. So it's a mountain, and I don't know what the height is. It's like the second tallest, in Wisconsin, but it's a mountain. Okay. So in the town, this whole community, like 35,000 is built around it. And then there's this 2-year college. And my second year at the college, I was voted in, and I don't know how this process went. It wasn't anything like you ran for, although I did run for president of not student council, student body or whatever it was. I got put up to do that because there was a guy who was running for vice president who didn't want the president job. He just wanted the vice president job. So he's like, and I played basketball there, and people kind of knew me, and they're like, would you run? I'm like, yeah. We lost anyway to this guy, Micah Digma, who went on to be a doctor and all this stuff. But anyway, so I got to be an ambassador. So basically there were like 12 of us. And, and they gave you like the vest. I mean, it's kind of like posing for the picture from Revenge of the Nerds with the tri-lamb shirt on and all of that. And it's still up there in the hallway. They've renovated this building, and it's nothing like it was when I was there. It was, when I was there, it still had lockers. I mean, it was a 2-year college, had lockers, had a gym, and it had a gym that was about like 10 levels below the quality of the gym of my small town high school. I mean, it was like, loose floor tiles, still metal backboards. I mean, it was just crazy. But I will say it was a great professors. I enjoyed it. It was just the way that it was at the time. So anyway, and there I get named ambassador. So an ambassador's role was to give new prospective students like tours of the campus and tell them about the campus, the history, and ask questions, show up at certain events, fundraisers and things like that, and be an usher. And then, certain days they would, you would go out and just greet students, different faculty events, things like this. There was one time we all got together at the dean's cabin, which was exceptional. And I thought it was formal. It was like in summer. So everyone's wearing shorts and like, a tank top, and even the dean. And I show up in like, khakis and, like a nice dress shirt. And that's all I have.
Right.
and then it's like the 3-hour drive up there, and it's like 95 degrees. And I remember like the dean's like, I got an extra pair of swim trunks if you want, like, that make you feel more comfortable. I'm like, no, like that wouldn't at all make me feel more comfortable. I'm fine. Fine the way I'm like right now. I don't need swim trunks and a dress shirt. But anyway, one of the things that I was asked to do, so the dean said, now, this is like, I don't know, 2,000 students attending this. So it's almost like a big high school. So like the dean knows you. And so he said, we have a candidate coming in for a position in, I don't know, history or whatever. And this guy was from like Arkansas or Kentucky or somewhere like that. And he goes, I need you to give him a tour of the town. So they had, the one vehicle, like back then, the Ford Escort with the UW Marathon Center logo on the side. They're like, just drive him around, show him the town and just answer questions and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, not a problem. So we get in and this guy's pretty cool, but he's young. He's a young PhD. So he's probably like late 20s. And I can tell he's nervous. And, what am I? I'm like 19 and, we're just driving around. So all of a sudden I just start creating these stories and I'm like, yeah, so this is a unique community. And this is before the internet. So he couldn't fact check any of this. And I'm not sure like how much research he did beforehand. And I was a great storyteller. I still am, and I could tell this stuff like super, super dry. And I'm like, yeah, I said, strange thing about living here is this is built on an inactive volcano. So like that is all like, morphomedic rock. I'm just making stuff up as I go, and so I'm like, we'll drive up there to the top. I'll kind of show you some of the stuff and things like that. So the guy's like, really? I'm like, yeah, once in a while, you can see steam come up from the volcano and like there's all these homes around, just it's inactive, but Mount St. Helens was inactive too. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing. And I live like 15 miles from it. It's one of the things if you grow up, you're kind of used to the inactive volcano. The guy's like, really? Wow. So, he's thinking, I don't know if I want to move my family here. I got to think about this. So we get to the top and there's all this like, these big boulders on top of this mountain. And which have always been up there. I mean, we went up there as kids. I mean, so I knew it was all up there. So
Right.
I'm telling them, yeah, this is all left over, and this is volcano and rock and from the last time, how many thousands of years ago. And so the guy's fascinated by this, absolutely fascinated. Had no idea this existed, So I take him back, shake his hand. He appreciates the tour, all the stuff. Next day, you get called in by the dean. And I'm sitting across from him, and he said, you gave this tour yesterday, and he said, can you help us understand why when we were talking to, let's say, Joseph about our community, he spent a lot of time talking about the volcano. Can you help me understand that, Dave? And I'm like, I'm he's like, you can't do that. And he's kind of laughing a little bit. And I don't think the guy got hired, but I mean, so, probably going to get a defamation suit in the mail here, but to just go and track the picture down, that's up in the hallway. But yeah, he brings me in and it's almost like an Animal House type scene, but I mean, and I knew why I was being called in, and he's looking at me, and at the same time he's got kind of that look in his eye of like, if I was your age, I might have done the same. I probably would have told him though at the end, like I was just kidding, but I never told this guy. So he goes in and yeah, he tells this story. And I'm sure they asked him, they're like, where did you exactly pick up on this? The guy, the cool guy doing the tour about the volcano. I went back up. I got some rocks. I'm gonna take him home and stuff like that. But so yeah, I got sizzled for that one, and I never got asked to do a tour again. Like that was it. I was not the tour guy. Yeah, that was done.
You're still struggling with that one, aren't you?
It was awesome. I was so on my game, and and he couldn't get enough of it. I mean, it was just amazing. So yeah, and the next day, I mean, getting called in. So it didn't, I still kept I didn't get my shirt my vest taken away or anything like that. So that was one of the things as an ambassador. So I'm going to just pull back, but the volcano story, and see that, I mean, I think that's good humor. I think that's the type of humor that people appreciate. This guy probably didn't appreciate much afterwards. Hopefully it's I'm straight, but I mean, I think that's the kind of humor, no one's getting hurt. You're not vandalizing things like that or whatever. I mean, you're just kind of in the moment. I think, I don't know. Maybe Larry's like, "Oh my God, Dave! Like,
No, it's
where in the what in the world were you? Yeah, were you on probation after that or?"
no, not at all.
Right.
We did something. We had. I worked in the office at the time, and we always played pranks. We were always pranking each other, trying to one up each other in pranks. And one of the ones that I like to do, and I had thought of this one, and I probably shouldn't have at the moment, but the phones there were black, so I got a ink pad and took the black the earpiece and the mouthpiece and stuck them on the ink pad. And then page so-and-so, right?
Right.
So-and-so comes in, they answer the phone, and they're like, dude, you said there was somebody here for me. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe they hung up. They got tired of waiting. I don't know. So, of course, when he puts the phone down, he's got a black ear and smudge all on his chin, and he's all inked up on the right side of his face. And needless to say, man, I could not believe, but he was this way for like 6 hours.
Really?
Before anybody said anything. And he's sitting there trying to have some serious conversation with somebody. And finally they went, do you know that you've got, stuff on all over? And of course he goes to the bathroom and looks, Larry! Right. And he was livid. And so needless to say, he had to one up me, but it was hard to one up that one. I can tell you that, because just for the length of time, he had it on for 6 hours at least.
Right.
Helping people coming in, hey, can you help me with this? Or, hey, can I pay this? Or, hey, whatever, asking questions. And he's all, I know what I'm doing. And half his face is black.
Yeah, people are like, don't say anything. It's a medical condition, elbowing each other. What was going on there?
We're an equal opportunity employer.
Yeah, it's a treatment. Guy's got a rash or something like that. Don't say anything. Look away. Look at floor.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
That was one of my better ones.
Wow. Right. Hey, well, I've got another one.
Okay.
It springs off the ambassador, the program, which, amazingly looking back, did not end after the 91-92 school year. But so at the end of my sophomore year, they have in the Performing Arts Center, a big ceremony to celebrate the people, graduating with associate's degrees. And then also the scholarships are giving to the incoming grads, recognizing faculty for distinguished awards and retirements and, the whole kind of end of year thing. So we had our 12 ambassadors and we're sitting on stage all together. And two of my ambassador friends, one was right next to me. His name was Her.
Oh man.
And next to Jur was Todd Kittle. Now Todd's dad was the sheriff of the county. So, and Todd is a complete prankster. And Jur, was like my best friend. You know, when I attended UWMC, he lived a couple blocks away. Just loved hanging out with him. Great guy. And Todd. So anyway, I'm kind of looking at Todd, and I kind of get the nod from Todd of, I kind of like, I'm going to try something here, but you got to like go along with it. And you know how you can just do the subtle nod, and you just know somebody well enough where they're like, okay. So the dean is up there speaking. I don't know. He's doing some kind of whatever about the university and growth and great things. And I'm kind of leaning over. I'm talking to Jur. I'm like, okay, you're up next. And he's like, yeah, what are you talking about? And then Todd leans in. He's like, you're up next. You're talking about the ambassadors, like the role of an ambassador, what you've seen, your personal growth, things like that. And Jur's like, what? We're like, yeah, that Kevin, who kind of oversaw us, like you didn't hear from Kevin? I didn't hear from Kevin. I'm like, sure. Well, don't worry about it. You nail it. Like, just go up there. There's nothing you have to prepare for. It's just you go up and you talk about what it's like to be an ambassador and stuff. And of course, we have him convinced. And at that point, he's like, okay, I got it. Yeah, that's no problem. So I'm like, yeah, what you're supposed to do is when the dean is like sitting down, you go up, and then that's, you do that, and then you just come back and sit down. So the dean gets done. Everybody's clapping, hey, this is great. University's rocking. And as he's sitting down, Jur stands up and makes his way up to the podium, and he's adjusting the mic. And nowhere in anything does it say there's this presentation out of this very detailed, every single thing that's going on. And Todd and I are just like staring forward at this point. Like, we want to make eye contact with nobody. And Jur goes in to this off the cuff, like 5-minute, incredible presentation about what it was like to be an ambassador, and being a part of the community and getting to meet people and all of this stuff. And then he sit there, round of applause, and he sits down and stuff like that. And then we're like, yeah, like, dude, you weren't supposed to do that at all. That one we told, like, right away, he sits down, and we kind of lean in. We're like, yeah. He's like, so we didn't hear from the dean. Dean didn't say anything after that. And I'm not even sure that the dean didn't think that there was some arrangement that happened, whoever was putting this together, that there was supposed to be some representation, because Georges was so fluent in how he did this. But yeah, he goes up, and the fact is, he just nails it. And he probably makes this thing better than it would have been anyway.
Sure.
He just adds to it. And totally, yeah. And we're just sitting there. And I mean, I respect the guy. He was a good friend. We wouldn't have done this if we would have known he would have gone up there and had a fear of speaking and would have struggled. But he was a confident. He was a cool guy. And so Jur goes up and gives the speech that never should have happened. And I don't know. Hey, and this reminds me. Did you know, was it FDR, like the day that will live in infamy? That speech.
Okay.
So there's research studies on that. So he had a nasal. This is factual. Okay, now I got to start prefacing things factual so people can actually go in and research. This is true. But he had a sinus infection, and he felt like he was speaking very nasally, and he wasn't going to have the powerful type of presentation that he wanted. So there were two things that happened. One is he had a speechwriter who came up with a pretty detailed speech that was supposed to go like 11 minutes or something. And he wrote the speech for FDR. And so that's part of it, that FDR, he's supposed to do the speech. And the other part is FDR goes to his doctor, and he said, I've got the sinus thing. And the doctor gives him cocaine. Okay, gives him cocaine. And again, you could find this. This is out there, and this is a historical fact. The amount of cocaine was never, I think, identified, but does give him cocaine because it was a treatment to open up the nostrils to do this.
I bet it was.
So basically, he goes up there and gives this speech that nowhere has been written down. It's basically like takes the first line of it, and then from that point, it's just like free. He just rolls with it, and he creates this thing from And it's, it's like 4 minutes. It's supposed to be 11. And it's a speech now. All of us, like, we're like the infamy speech, and Roosevelt doesn't even remember, giving this speech, and things like that. He's like, why am I covered in ants? They're like, edit that part out. That's what they're telling people. Edit that part out. 10-second delay. But no, yeah, I'm like, what? You got to be kidding me. I'm going through like the history facts, and I did. It was substantiated that he didn't follow the speech, and they think that he was, part of this was, he just how powerful the presentation was, and that he freelanced it was because of the cocaine.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, all these little quirky things like from history. So yeah,
Well,
I don't know. I mean, I just to this day I'm just thinking that is just one of the weirdest things, to think about. But
that's interesting, though. I mean, so the next time you give a speech, maybe, just maybe. No, not really. I'm just kidding.
no.
I don't want to say it for real. I don't want to jeopardize your chances at any witnessing.
But
so.
I can, usually, and I don't have any, just like you. I mean, I don't have any fear of presenting to people. But there's once in a while when you're presenting for a while, and all of a sudden you start to realize your mind is caught up to what you're saying, so you're actually analyzing the words you're saying. And I'm like, ooh, like I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to say next. Like then you got to take a little bit of a break or something, and kind of get caught up because I'm trying to like invent the words as I'm saying them. But
add a couple of syllables here.
But yeah, I'm kind of going through. I did a presentation, and I color coded the parts because I was kind of tag teaming with somebody else, and I had set the whole thing up for them. They were with the district, and I didn't realize I went over into one of their parts. So I kind of put them in an awkward spot to then give some kind of like a her type of little synopsis without really following the script or something. But I don't know. That didn't work very well. The color coding thing, when you're working with people that you really haven't worked with before, just isn't a good model. Someone's like, hey, I'm colorblind. I'm like, oh, no.
No, but that's really blue. I swear.
This is. I'm like, we're in trouble. We're in trouble right now. So I just print everything now on just kind of separate pages, and I figure out saying more or saying less obviously is better, and things like that. But yeah. So I mean, as we wrap this up, I think we covered some really relevant, pertinent content in a society that is only going to continue, unfortunately, to experience attacks, just weird things. Like I saw in the news, like, Baltimore, suffering from so much heroin addiction that librarians are trained now to administer Narcan, the nasal inhaler, which counteracts, some levels of these drugs. And so, yeah, I mean, it's either, that, or it's, part of a glacier broke off, or, oil rig and something else. And it's one of these things where one is, I think we need to keep informing people. And the other one is, we can't get too lost in this social narrative, because I think that can just cause paralysis. I mean, it can just freak you out to the point where, it's you went on an ambulance driver, Stephen
Kavalkovich.
Steven.
Yes.
And there was something very interesting when he was talking about his experience of being an ambulance driver. And I believe he said because of addiction, that was why he lost that position, right? Because
Correct.
of addiction.
Yep.
And I actually had been part of a training where there was an ambulance driver who talked about, a young guy, but he talked about how he, so there were places he would respond to, and then he couldn't go back there, like, again. So maybe it was an accident at the corner of Main and 2nd Street. So as he's driving, he would bypass that area. And then it just compounded. And eventually, like, to go from his town, his place, a half mile to the grocery store would take him a half hour because he would have to try to navigate all these routes where nothing bad had ever happened. So it was a psychological thing he couldn't process anymore. And he did go in for treatment and ended up leaving as a paramedic. And I think he changed towns, but then he came back actually and served then as a paramedic. But he was giving this presentation and I was like, oh my goodness, like it was just crazy. But yeah, he said everywhere like he went, he was just making these visual maps of, oh yeah, this is where we picked up the guy that had the heart attack. This is, where the person, had the tree limb they were cutting down, that killed him when it fell down. And this is where the accident was. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it was just, and so when you did that interview, it kind of reminded me of the pressures of how those memories, they don't have a chance to this cumulative stress. And that's why when you had him on, as a debriefer, and I don't get called in a lot, but it's like he goes through so much and all the other responders, and they're not debriefed. Their debriefing is, like he said, at 7:00 in the morning when the bar opens up and it's the night shift nurses and doctors and him and whatever.
Right.
And you kind of commiserate. And then you throw yourself into bed for a few hours and you do it again. And I think his experience is really a symptom of a significantly flawed system of how we work with our responders. Realistically, like in our town, we have 10,000 people, and last year was the most responses the fire department had. And it's from like 10 years ago, it's up like 20-fold. And it just is continuing. So these things used to be more sporadic and you would have time to decompress and stuff, but it's just not that way anymore. And of course, he was Jersey City. So, I mean, you're a high population, high dense area. You're going to have a lot of stuff going on. He's a young guy.
Yep.
And that's one of the things as a debriefer, it is so important to have people to be able to do that. And I really felt for him as he's sharing that experience, because I'm like, he was the direct cause of a root cause, which happens everywhere that nobody wants to admit that it is going on. Like everyone's going to be an iron man, iron woman. You're just going to deal with this. You're going to process it. But it is this cumulative stress disorder. And as he's telling that, I'm like, I understand the science behind what brought him to where he was at. Like I totally get it. So that's why I think I might have contacted you and said, if he had an interest in contacting me, because that was one thing as a debriefer I wanted to throw past him. What do you think might have been different, or did you attend any debriefings? And I think he mentioned a couple that he might have gone to, but there was also the fear of like, well, if you go to that, you're stereotyped as not being strong,
right,
and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I struggle with that because, I've worked on some debriefings, which honestly have, I mean, and I'm neutral to this. I mean, I wasn't there, but I mean, debriefings where like I almost crumble, and I'm like, I've got to keep this together for everybody who's in the room, and it might be hours, and I'll come home and I'll run at night. And just to close this out, so I'm running Sunday night. I'm out running late. And I had some expert witness report stuff to get done. I think I shared with you, there's nothing like when 17,000 pages of deposition, get delivered to your house under a timeline. But I'm out running late Sunday night, and I get pulled over by the police. It's not a first. It's happened to me before. As it is running, and not running with a spear or anything like that, or a baseball bat, or an
not dressed as a ninja or
pillowcase, not dressed as a ninja. I had a neon vest on, running shoes. I don't want to say old man because I don't believe I'm old man, but the Bellamy Brothers, that song Old Hippie, like he's an old hippie and he don't know what to do. Should he hang on to the old? And then the song is about a 35-year-old guy. I'm like going to be 46 in 2 weeks. I'm like 35. Come on. But anyway, so I get pulled over. And the guy, a young officer, so like 20 years younger than I am. And, how you doing tonight, sir? I'm like, yeah, I said I'm doing all right. Just had a lot of paperwork stuff, and it's a really nice night. I mean, it was a really nice night here. It was, still probably like upper 60s and great running. And I said, I got my vest on and so I'm like, is there a problem? He's like, no, you live around here. I'm like, yeah, I live, right up, gave him the address, stuff like that. And, he doesn't run it or anything. Like at that point, sees me and he's like, okay, this guy's fine. And then he stops. He goes, well, hey, what's the status of Aaron Rodgers? Packers quarterback. Okay. He goes, yeah, what's the status of Aaron Rodgers? I'm like, yeah, I think he's out for the year with a broken collarbone. Guy's like, what? He's like, I've been like just nonstop stops all day. Like my shift is going to end like, in a half hour. And this guy had been on shift during the game and he didn't get the updates. And so he's got his computer, but he's like trying to do some paperwork and he had no idea. I mean, the guy, he just knew he was injured. So he's asking me, and then he gets into 15 minutes of, we're just talking Packers. That's all we're talking is football. And then what are they going to do? They're going to run Aaron Jones after this or whatever. And I'm like, hey, and I attended games back when Favre was there and before Favre. And I'm like, I remember the stadium before they had a Jumbotron. And the guy's like, yeah, really? I'm like, yeah. And, just like a regular scoreboard just told you there's just the numbers, just lit up. I'm like, the guy's like amazing. I mean, it's like a history. Like this didn't, honestly, he's going to tell people, I met someone that actually went to the stadium before it had a Jumbotron. Yeah, I did. Seriously. Look at the pictures. Yeah. But it's like, the guy's like, just, yeah. I'm like, yeah, it was, so it was this so funny thing. And then, he's like, do you play fantasy football? I'm like, yeah, I'm in 2 leagues. And Guy Packers, yeah. I'm like, Randall Cobb and a couple others. I don't know, I'll have to drop them or something, stuff like that. I said, yeah. So, he's like, yeah, I've been in a couple leagues with whatever and stuff. I'm like, and at some point I'm thinking like, shouldn't you get back on, the patrol thing? And by the way, like I live in the neighborhood and, you just, people are driving by and, so,
running cocaine.
Yeah. I don't want to, we don't need this whole narrative of 12 o'clock at night, the police were out there with Dave for 15 minutes and stuff like this. So yeah, those can kind of stop, but yeah, it's been more than once. And sometimes, I'll run late, but the thing is though, like after I do like a debriefing, I typically go out and I'll run and the debriefings get done later, and things like that. But no, I always thank the police, I'm like, thanks for, checking out the town and things like that. And part of it too is I'll say like, well, if you ever see anything out here, because the area or whatever, and I don't know, it's a pretty safe area. I don't really see anything, but yeah. So I am, yeah. They're like, hey, stop this guy. He keeps up on all the sports,
For your sports fix.
For your sports fix, like, yeah, run down Slaper Street. And then, yeah, you're going to see this guy and yeah, he'll have it. So just go there. Just pull him over. Yeah. Just ask for the scores.
Man, what you got, man? You got the scores, man. You got them scores.
Started out light with conversation. Don't go there right away. You don't want to freak him out. Yeah. But yeah, seriously.
I don't have any scores. I don't have any. No.
He's like, how about the Philadelphia game? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, what? You got an Android, don't you? He's like, I'm going to look away. You go look at scores and then tell me. Just say that. I mean, it's so funny. This guy's like, he's 25. He's cool. He's fun, But the whole context of the thing was just so weird.
That is odd.
Yeah. And again, and then it gets into this whole thing and then, yeah, the history. And then he's actually in the presence of someone that attended the stadium when it only sat, 52,000 and not the 80,000 and was this corrugated, just this horrible place to watch any type of game and stuff like that. I don't know. I just got a kick out of it. It made my day. So
awesome.
Anything else here, Larry? Anything big coming up?
No, I got a dog that is diabetic and she is dying to get her shot. Well, I shouldn't say dying. She is anxious to get her shot.
You need to take care of that fast.
I do.
So I appreciate the co-show. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And I think, again, people are going to get benefit out of this. And again, people have the same questions that we have about things like, just kind of navigating this whole thing with podcasting. And I'll say again, readilyrandom.com, go there, check out the shows that Larry produces. They're number one for me. I love them. And I just can't say enough. Thanks for jumping in and doing what you do, Larry.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's like I tell Twyla, my mission is just to get the word out there and get a variety of different stories and try to bring some fresh perspectives on the same old stories that we hear and hear it directly from the individual that's experienced it. So, Dr. Perrodin, thank you very much for coming on the show back in the early days. And I got to be honest, I don't remember how I found you either, but it had to do with something Twitter related, I'm sure.
Yeah. Did you do a preface on that show? Like, safety, it's typically really boring and it really kind of sucks.
I did not do
but
that.
the show is
No.
not that way. Like
No,
everybody else has to do.
I'm pretty sure it was, this is another exciting episode of the Readily Random podcast.
So yeah, I don't know. I got to think of some way maybe to address that or yeah, something a little bit, because it seems like everybody has to intro me with that phrase of just wait, this isn't going to be ladder heights or OSHA.
It's a good one, I swear.
Yeah, we're not going to test water quality or anything like that, or whatever it is. So well, I appreciate it. Take care of your dog. I'll keep in tune, and we'll keep in contact. And again,
Yes,
thanks for all that you do. And really, Larry, on a very serious note, though, the shows, especially the personal stories, I just know people listen to those and they reflect, and it helps people. And so many people just struggling, and when they hear some of these stories, I just think it's that boost, it's that change in perspective. And these are stories that are not getting out of the media, but these are the stories that you're putting out there. In addition to these fasting stories like Joe Navarro, who people, don't realize how inner workings of the big mechanisms of society and all this kind of intrigue and all that stuff. And I just love it. I love all of your work. And, but
I appreciate it so much.
Take care of the dog. So.
Thank you again for having me on the show. I love the co-show. I can't wait to promote it as well. And we'll do it again sometime.
Appreciate it. Larry, you have a great evening. Signing
You too.
out here
Take care
from the
yourself.
Safety Doc and Readily Random. Everybody take care, be safe, and hey, let's live a good life. And Larry, close it out with the Readily Random.
And this has been another exciting episode of the Readily Random podcast. How's that?
And the music is...
Oh, it's what is it? Oh, you can be larger than life. Good Lord, you put me on the spot. You can be larger than life. That's the tagline for the entire show.
Yes.
So I was like, what is the song? You can be larger than life. Yes.
Yeah, by Pink Zebra. So
Yes,
I
by the
love
Pink
it.
Zebra.